Hello everybody, here we are today continuing on with season previews as we are talking about the Nashville Predators. Now before we start, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or the channel, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So Nashville is coming off of a season where they missed the playoffs for the first time in just about a decade, might have been a decade on the mark. They have a lot of questions surrounding this team, a new GM and a new head coach, and some new guys, of course, on the roster. So what are some storylines going into the season after the Preds are out of the playoffs last year, looking to get back into it this year? So the first question is, what is Barry up to now? Barry Trotz obviously coached the Preds back in the day, and it was for a while they had some success. They were able to make the playoffs, and he was under GM David Poile in that era. Poile, obviously the only GM in Preds history until he ended up, taking over a different role going into this summer, and Trotz took over now for his former team that he coached. Poile, I think, kind of realized that the writing was on the wall since last year. They needed to trade some guys out. They weren't going to be in a spot where if they made the playoffs, they're even going to really be able to do a whole lot with this roster. And he decided to ship guys out. Whereas Trotz comes in and he makes some interesting signings. The Ryan O'Reilly signing is probably one of those bigger ones. The Luke Shin signing is also interesting as well. So you have a former head coach of the club that has been a very successful head coach in the NHL with the Predators, the Capitals, and the Islanders. He takes over, and it's his first time being a GM, taking over for a club that looked like they were going to be sellers and be going in a downward trajectory. And he, invests some money, not just like chump change, but he invests some money to make this team better. Are they a Stanley Cup favorite by his signings? Absolutely not. But are they kind of a question mark for this season? I do think that they are, and I will give my thoughts at the end of this as to where I think they stand. But in general, you have a club that Barry seems to be more invested in than I feel like we are, where a lot of fans are like, they weren't that great for the past few years, so they are going to be in a rebuild or a retool. And then Barry is saying, no, actually, we're going to get the job done. We're going to get the playoffs, whatever the case may be. I will say this, Barry has had a lot of success as a head coach, and he has not had to coach any bad teams since I think like the early 2000s was where there were some years where they weren't making the playoffs consistently. So for him, the playoffs are a norm. I wonder if part of it is him getting in the GM role and saying, well, this has been my legacy now to get things going in the right direction. And it's been, like 20 years since I've had some sides that weren't making the playoffs regularly. I have to start off the GM spot on the right foot. I don't know if that's actually the case. I do think he has a winner's mindset, and for him it might be hard to accept if they're poor, but I guess if they, start up the year pretty well, we could see Barry saying, let's invest even more money, let's invest to our roster a little bit different ways, but I guess we'll see what old Barry's up to. So the second talking point is, can the offense improve drastically? So looking at the Predators last year, they finished with the 6th worst goals for per 60. Not good. They had 23 games where they scored 2 goals or less, and that is not an ideal thing. There is a lot of 2-1 wins, and like I've said before, teams that win the President's Trophy are probably teams that are winning, 5-2, 4-1, something like that on any given night. Teams that are, in the hunt for the playoffs or just scraping in their way to the playoffs are winning those 3-2, those 2-1 games. That's kind of what Nashville has been for a while. Problem is their offense hasn't been great. And they ended up losing some guys from their forward core last year that aren't there now, obviously. So that could be a loss for them offensively. Kind of wondering what's going to happen here with them and how the void's going to be filled. Probably looking at a 33-year-old Roman Josi to try to get the job done. Obviously, a guy that's been able to have really good production offensively is a defenseman. And then maybe a guy like, Ryan O'Reilly to go out there. In general, it is kind of weird because you're looking at a lot of guys that are in their 30s, probably expected to carry the load offensively. Their forward group, I think, has more questions to it than an exam. And I think right now you're kind of wondering, can they be better offensively? The good news is they did hire Andrew Brunette as the head coach, and when he was in Florida for that short time, they were a really good team offensively, one of the best, if not the best team. And for them, I think that the success was tied to the offense. Obviously, they were able to outscore a lot of teams, and I don't think that they were viewed as a great defensive team that year. Now, of course, the Predators' forward group and just their offensive potential in general is probably not as good as what the Florida side saw, but I do think there could be some changes. Maybe they did not have great zone entry defense last year, which allowed us some poor results, in their own end. So maybe with what we see from Coach B, his Florida side forechecked a lot. Maybe you could see the situation here where it's let's just keep them pinned into their end. We can get some goals that way and get a lot of offensive zone possession time. I don't really know, but it is something that's going to have to be dramatically improved because you're not going to win a lot of 2-1 games with a lot of 30-year-olds, and if you are, is that consistent recipe for success for a long-term future. Now, the third and final talking point is, can Juuse Saros have another Vezina contending type season? So last year, Saros was a huge driving force for this club, being better than expected. He actually led the league in SPAR, standing points above replacement for goalies last year, with 16.8. Basically meaning had he not played for the Predators, they would have finished with about 75 points on the year compared to the 92 that they ended up having. And he was leading the league for games played by goalies with 64, fifth in the league for goals saved above average, while finishing 8th in wins with 33. He also, of course, is a guy that's been, the filler in for Pekka Rinne. Came in, there were some rocky points, and then it's been rock solid for him. 2 really good years, if I'm not mistaken. He has been the reason, in my opinion, and I think a lot of other people's opinion, that Nashville has been able to make the playoffs when they shouldn't have some years. The bad news for him is Nashville was atrocious at 5-on-5 defense last year. Again, I kind of talked about how they were just letting teams kind of get in there. I don't know. I kind of wish I could see what the neutral zone data was on that. I don't have any access to that right now. I'm trying to look into that because it's just atrocious looking at the numbers and looking at how players performed in terms of pressures and zone entries allowed. It's just abysmal. And the reality is here, Saros had to play 60-some games and they still missed the playoffs despite the fact that he was a stud for them. I don't know. I look at Kevin Lankinen's stats from last year and he didn't play a whole lot of games, which is kind of weird to me. But I'd like to see them give a little bit more games to Lankinen. Obviously, he had a bit of a role there in Chicago with the Hawks. Had, decent success on a bad team the first year. The second year, I think, was just a dumpster fire. The team in general obviously wasn't great. But Lankinen only got, I think, less than 20 games last year. So if you can relieve Saros and give him less games, and even if the defense is still bad, maybe he'll be more fresh. Because, again, you just can't throw him out there for 65 games again this year. It's just a recipe for disaster in terms of what his health could be. Last thing you need is for him to be hurt, not only for, a couple weeks, but the whole year, maybe a season and a half, whatever the case is. He is a great goalie. You don't want to mess around with it. I will say, though, Saros obviously had the offseason to kind of rest up, get ready to go. So I am hoping things are going well here. Maybe Ryan O'Reilly can rediscover that Selke contending defensive game that a lot of people are hyping up. And you're probably, again, hoping for some underrated seasons defensively for some other guys. I don't know. Again, maybe they forecheck a little bit more this year to keep the puck in the team's offensive, or the team's defensive zone, the opposing team's defensive zone, and then just take a lot of pressure off Saros because things weren't great. But again, Saros probably going to have another good year. So overall, what are my thoughts on the Predators? I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. I know some Preds fans have asked me over the course of the channel, why am I so negative on them? It's just because they were a team that was built to make the playoffs, and that was it. They weren't built to do anything since the channel started. 2020, I think, was the year that we ended up, going through and doing the playoff previews. That year, they lost in the qualifying round, I think, to Arizona, and they just haven't been able to do a whole lot since then. This is not the 2017 Nashville Predators, all right? We have to understand that. And David Poile, I think, wanted to keep the playoff streak alive. So I think he kind of kept kicking the can down the road. And then he just realized last year that this was it. They could not be a playoff team. And he was going to sell some pieces off. Of course, they ended up doing pretty well afterwards, I think. But the reality stands that I don't view them as a playoff team. Definitely not top 3 in the division. Probably would have to be a wild card. Again, relying on older guys after a poor year defensively. Relying on a goalie to play 60-some games. It seems like a recipe that's built for failure because something's going to break down at some point. And I don't know. I'm hoping they don't have a truly awful year. I kind of see them as a team that will finish 4th through 6th in the division this year. But again, I really don't know what Barry's doing because he could say, I view this team differently, and then just keep trying to make this team a little better, a little better, a little better. So maybe they are in contention for the wild card, but again, not top 3 in the division for myself. Maybe I'll be wrong, because they were in the playoffs a couple years ago and I didn't expect them to be. Now granted, it was the wild card, so settle down there. But anyway, what are your thoughts on the Predators going into the season? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, I'm trying not to be negative, just my opinion. Anyway, everybody please leave your thoughts in the comments. Everybody make sure to stay safe. Have a great night, and you go love hockey, alright. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.